dream stands beneath Shekhinah, so Gabriel is outside of the purely divine realm, which means that demonic forces nearby can smuggle in false images. The dream is contaminated by falsehood. How can the dream have anything false if the dream comes from God, if the dream somehow is rooted in the divine? Because it has to move through various stages, from Netzach to Hod, to Yesod, to Shekhinah, to Michael, to Gabriel. It's 6 steps removed. Why does he want 6? Because of 60. Okay, remember he said that a dream is 1/60th of prophecy. Now that fraction 1/60th is being translated into mystical numbers. So we move from 1/60th to 6. That's why I think he's playing with 6, and Gabriel being 6 stages away from the beginning of prophecy in the steward. Back to the Zohar. Consequently, some of them are true and some are false. Some dreams are true, some are false. You cannot have a dream that does not contain both this side and that. You can't have a dream that doesn't have false material, because the dream traverses some territory outside of the divine realm before it reaches our mind. Since a dream includes all, as we have said, all dreams of the world follow oral interpretation. What does that mean? All dreams of the world follow oral interpretation. This has been established, for it is written, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Where is that from? You can tell it's a verse because it's in italics, right? Everything in italics is from the Bible. This is from Genesis as well, but later in Genesis, just a few chapters later, Joseph is sold down to Egypt, sold by his brothers. He becomes a servant in the house of Potiphar. You may remember, Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. Joseph withstands the temptation, is not seduced, but despite that, he ends up in jail. And when he's in jail, he interprets dreams of 2 of Pharaoh's ministers who've been sent to prison. And one of those for whom he interprets the dream later is restored to Pharaoh's service. And he tells Pharaoh, I know someone who can interpret your dreams. Pharaoh also has a dream. He's very troubled.
Beyond the shadow of a doubt that God is not.
Why? And he asks his interpreters, can you interpret? Nobody can. But Pharaoh's minister, the chief wine steward, tells Pharaoh, I remember when I was in prison, Joseph interpreted our dreams. A Hebrew lad interpreted our dreams, and he now can help you with your dreams. So how does that show you that all dreams follow an oral interpretation? Let's look at note 196. Note 195 is interesting too. Just look at here 195, that's this paragraph from the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai, right, the hero of the Zohar, Shimon bar Yochai. This is an actual statement attributed to Rabbi Shimon in the Talmud. Just as there cannot be wheat without straw, so there cannot be a dream without nonsense. Okay, the Zohar says there's falsehood in the dream. Rabbi Shimon says there's nonsense in the dream. That's the Talmudic source. But 196, all dreams of the world follow oral interpretation. The true meaning of a dream depends on its interpretation. Look at the power there that's given to interpreting. The true meaning of a dream depends on its interpretation. It's a remarkable statement. And here too, there's a parallel in the Talmud, same tractate. These pages of the first tractate, 55, pages 55 to 58, I think, a few pages in the Talmud are filled with material on dreams. Rabbi Elazar said in the Talmud, how do we know that all dreams follow the mouth of the interpreter? And how do you know that interpretation determines the dream? Because it is said, as he interpreted to us, so it was. This verse, spoken by the wine steward, describing Joseph's mastery of dream interpretation, is quoted to show that interpretation is decisive. It is Pharaoh's chief cupbearer describing how accurately Joseph interpreted his dream. Okay, so the Zohar is saying dreams need an interpretation. Why? Because a dream contains falsehood and truth, and the word controls all. So a dream needs favorable interpretation. Let's look at note 197. the word of the interpreter possesses the power to actualize one of the possible meanings of the dream, for better or for worse. Okay, the dream could mean various things, and once an interpretation is given, that becomes decisive. Think of this psychologically. You have a dream, you ask somebody what the dream means, they tell you what it means. Maybe it meant that, maybe it didn't mean that. But if somebody says this is what it means, that can be very powerful, sometimes too powerful. The dream can determine, the interpretation can determine what the dream means. So that's all Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Yehuda said, back to the Zohar, because every dream is of the rung below, controlled by speech. So every dream follows speech. What does this mean? Every dream is of the rung below. Every dream comes from that angel Gabriel. Gabriel is controlled by Shekhinah, who's known as speech. One of her many names, she is speech. She conveys the divine word. You could say the whole system of the Sfirot is seen as God speaking. God's mind, Chokhmah and Bina, right? Then Bina is also seen as the throat, Tiferet as the voice, but not yet an articulated voice. Malchut, Shekhinah, is articulated speech. So the process of emanation is the process of God's word being pronounced. And that finally happens through Shekhinah. So she is called speech, Dibur. She is called speech. And that's why our speech is important here. Every dream follows human speech because human speech triggers divine speech. Look at note 198. Rung below controlled by speech. Gabriel, the rung below, is controlled by Shekhinah, who conveys the divine word and is known as speech. According to Rabbi Yehuda, human interpretation is effective because it activates divine speech, Shekhinah, who then translates the dream into reality. That's the process the Zohar sees here. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda related it to Shekhinah because of speech, human speech and divine speech. Now Rabbi Yehuda gives his further view. He opened his talk. He opened the verse up. He opened himself. He opened saying, now another biblical verse about dreaming from Job. In a dream, a vision of night, when deep sleep falls upon humans, in slumber upon the bed, he then uncovers human ears, and with a warning, terrifies them. Okay, what's terrifying a person? Something in a dream, maybe predicting some disaster, some message that comes to you in a dream. That's how Job describes what could happen in a dream. Come and see. When a person climbs into bed, he should first enthrone and acknowledge the kingdom of heaven. What does that mean? He should recite the Shema. By reciting the Shema when you go to sleep, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's called, in rabbinic texts, accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Acknowledging the kingdom of heaven. By reciting the Shema, just saying at 199, by reciting the Shema, you enthrone God. You're accepting God as the universal ruler. So when you climb into bed, you should say the Shema, then recite a verse of compassion, a certain verse that the Talmud identifies. It's note already on the next page. So from Psalm 31:6, into your hand I entrust my spirit. You redeem me, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, God of truth. B'yadcha afkid ruchi. Into your hand I entrust my spirit. Beautiful verse, and that's considered part of the evening ritual in bed, to recite the Shema, and then to recite a verse of compassion. For when a human sleeps upon his bed, his soul leaves him and goes wandering above, each in its own way, ascending so, as has been said. Okay, when you're sleeping in bed, your body is asleep, your soul is sailing through heaven, wandering through heaven. It means each in its own way, according to its conduct, depending on how it's acted during the day, it's able to explore certain regions of heaven. That may be implied here. What is written? In a dream, a vision of night, when people lie asleep in bed and the soul leaves them, As is written, slumber upon the bed, he then uncovers human ears. Okay, God gives a message. Through the dream, God uncovers human ears. God speaks into a person through the dream, thereby uncovering the ear, unblocking the ear. How does that happen? Then the Blessed Holy One informs the soul through Gabriel, through the rung presiding over dreams. Notice the Zohar avoids naming the Sfirot, or even avoids naming the angels, wants to be as cryptic as possible, the rung presiding over dreams. We only know that means Gabriel because we saw it on the previous page. The Zohar does not make it easy. The Zohar is intentionally cryptic, as I said. So God informs the soul through Gabriel of things destined to befall the world, or of things corresponding to the mind's imaginings, so that one will follow a path of admonishment in the world. So God is giving admonishment, God is giving warning about what might happen, how a person should work on his or her own character. How do those messages come? They might be a message of what will happen, what will befall the world. They might be corresponding to the mind's imaginings. What does that mean? The dream could be corresponding to the mind's imagining. This is based on another statement in the same place in the Talmud, Brachot 55. Rabbi Shmuel, son of Nachmani, said, a person is shown in his dreams only his mind's imaginings. Very interesting statement. This is very Freudian, about as Freudian as you could get. What you're shown in a dream, according to this statement in the Talmud, is simply what you've been thinking about during the day, maybe what you've been repressing, what you've been thinking or what you've been trying not to think, what's been going on in your mind or right beneath the surface in your subconscious. That's what comes out in a dream. Amazing statement. This is from a rabbi in the 3rd century of the Common Era in the Babylonian Talmud, but very close to what Freud would say. You'd say it's one of the bases of Freud's whole dream theory is right here in this line. So sometimes it can be a future prediction, sometimes it can be reflecting what's been going on in your mind's imaginings, so that one will follow the path. Okay, and the point of this, back to the end of this note 203, the prefiguring of the future serves as admonishment to the dreamer to return to the straight path, as suggested by Jude. Continuing in the Zohar here. For one is not informed while in a state of bodily vigor. You're not given this message when you're awake. Okay, bodily vigor means when you're awake, only when you're asleep. When you're asleep, the body is quiescent, the soul is free to roam above, the soul can hear this message, an awake body can't perceive it. Rather, an angel informs the soul, and the soul informs the person, and that dream derives from above when souls leave the body and ascend, each in its own way. How many rungs upon rungs in the mystery of a dream, all in the mystery of wisdom. Come and see, dream one rung, vision one rung, prophecy one rung. What does he mean there? Dream, Gabriel, vision, Shekhinah, prophecy, Netzach and Hod. Just one more time here. Dream, Gabriel. Vision, Malchut or Shekhinah. Prophecy, Netzach and Hod. So he's playing with the Sfirot, Netzach and Hod. Come and see. He is quiet, of bodily vigor. Soul, prop, Gabriel. Vision, Malchut or Shekhinah. Prophecy, Netzach and Hod. So he's playing with the Sfirot, he's hinting at the Sfirot, dream one rung. Again, rung often means Sfirah. Vision one rung, prophecy one rung, all rungs upon rungs, one above another. Now we come to Joseph. And look how long it's taken him to get to Joseph. Actually, one rabbi began, now the second rabbi continues, and finally comes back to the verse we're supposed to be interpreting. Joseph dreamed a dream and told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Okay, the dream of the sheaf, Joseph's sheaf, and the brothers bowing down. The brother sheaves bowing down to Joseph's sheaf. From here we learn that a person should tell his dream only to one who loves him. You shouldn't tell your dream to someone who doesn't like you. Why? Otherwise, he may prove decisive, for that if that dream changes tone, he is the cause. What does that mean? Otherwise, that person you've told the dream to who doesn't like you, that person might prove decisive because the dream could change tone based on your enemy's interpretation. Remember the power of the word, the power of interpretation. The interpretation can determine what the dream means. Look at note 207. Otherwise, he may prove decisive. If the dreamer tells his dream to someone who hates him, this enemy can harm him by the spiteful tone of his interpretation, which affects the fulfillment of the dream. And we'll see this now with how the brothers interpreted Joseph's dream. Okay, to change his tone, what does that mean? The dream could mean one thing or another thing. The dream is somewhat open-ended, but an interpretation freezes the meaning into one, either positive or negative. It could change tone. It could take on a specific tone. Come and see. We're near the end of the passage now. Come and see. Since Joseph told his dream to his brothers, they caused it to be postponed, delaying it for 22 years. Now, what is this talking about? Joseph? The dream is that the brothers will bow down to Joseph. That eventually happens. You may remember, eventually Joseph's brothers go down to Egypt to find grain because there's drought, there's famine, and they don't realize it, but Joseph, who now is a viceroy to the king, they have to come to Joseph to ask for grain. They come to Joseph, he knows who they are, but they don't know who he is. They bow down to him, thinking they're bowing down to the viceroy of Egypt, but they're actually bowing down to Joseph as Joseph's dream predicted 22 years earlier. According to biblical chronology or rabbinic understanding of biblical chronology, that took 22 years. Look at note 208, page 117, the left-hand column. Note 208. The first dream recounted by Joseph, which we read, look, we were binding sheaves in the field, and look, my sheaf arose and actually stood up, and look, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. As indicated by Rabbi Levi in the Talmud, notice the same pages again, the dream material in Brachot. It took 22 years for this dream to be fulfilled. In other words, for Joseph's brothers to bow down to him in Egypt, as described later in Genesis. Okay, so because Joseph told his dream to his brothers and they disliked him, they enabled the dream to be delayed. They messed with the dream. Maybe otherwise the brothers would have bowed to him right away. It took 22 years because Joseph made the mistake of telling it to his brothers who disliked him. But Rabbi Yossi now adds something else. Rabbi Yossi said, how do we know this? Because it is written they hated him even more. Right? When he told them that dream, they hated him even more. What does hated him mean? They provoked accusers against him. They stimulated negative forces. They stimulated demonic powers up in heaven who delayed the dream. That's what it says in the note. What is written? He said to them, listen, please, to this dream that I dreamed, begging them to listen. Then he revealed that dream to him. Right? The dream that we know, the sheaves bowing down. If they had transformed its tone, if they could have changed the meaning of the dream, if they had transformed its tone so it would have been fulfilled, they could have made the dream mean something else. But how did they respond? They responded by saying, will you really reign over us? Will you really rule over us? Suddenly they had told him the interpretation of the dream, enacting the decree. That is why they hated him even more. So what's going on here? The Zohar is saying, because Joseph's brothers said, will you really reign over us? By saying that, by verbalizing that, they made that into what the dream meant. That's what the dream could have meant. We think that's what the dream did mean. But because they said it, they sealed their fate. They enacted a decree. They put it into words. They mouthed that meaning, and that meaning then held. Look at note 211, page 117, the left-hand column. If they had transformed its tone, if the brothers had interpreted the dream unfavorably for Joseph, it would have been fulfilled accordingly. However, their spontaneous, hateful response, will you reign over us? guaranteed that the dream would be actualized precisely that way by Joseph's dominance. By verbally expressing this interpretation, they had sealed both their fate and his. Realizing what they had done to themselves, they hated Joseph all the more. Okay, that seems to be the last element Rabbi Yossi is adding. They realized what they had done. They spurted it out. They let out the meaning of the dream. Then they were stuck with it. They hated him all the more because they had sealed their fate. Let's stop the share now and open it up to discussion. A lot of material here, a lot of ideas. I see a lot of things in the chat. Maybe Ari can start us off, and then
there's some great input. I think Zoom has changed my ability, because if there's too much chatting, I can turn it off and control it. But this week has not enabled me to do it. So
sure, fine.
The good news is it allows people to chat, and it's been a generally very good chat. And the challenge is people are trying to focus on so many different things. It does frustrate some people. So that being said, there was a great question about this dreams and ladders that was an obvious reference or tied into Jacob's ladder to some of our people here. So I want you to comment on that, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting, because Jacob's ladder, of course, is a dream, right? Jacob dreams of a ladder. He doesn't climb the ladder, but he's dreaming of a ladder. And here we have the image of ladder with dream. So that's a wonderful connection. I see one thing in the chat I want to respond to right away. Yeah, someone already answered it partly. We see a lot of masculine names in the Sefirot. What about feminine names? Let's take a look at this. So are there women in the Sefirot? And there are certain women, mainly with Shekhinah, as you might guess, Malchut. Okay, her technical name is Malchut, but I'm referring to her as Shekhinah. So various women, biblical female heroes are associated with Shekhinah, especially Sarah, Abraham's wife. Esther, Queen Esther, other women as well, but Leah, Rachel, who is the mother of Joseph, Jacob's wife Rachel is associated with Malchut. Jacob's other wife, Leah, is associated with Bina, which is interesting. Rachel is more of a positive figure, is much more of a hero in Jewish tradition than Leah, and Rachel is portrayed more positively in the Torah than Leah is. But Leah reaches a higher rung in the Kabbalah. Leah is Bina, maybe because she's more hidden. There's allusions to Leah being hidden, and Bina is a more hidden realm than Malchut. So you do have feminine imagery. Look, we have to say this: the Kabbalah was created almost entirely, if not entirely, by men. The people who studied it for centuries were almost entirely men. Now that has changed and is changing dramatically, but still we have to be aware of the masculine bias of this whole system, and that applies to all of Western religious thought. Judaism, Christianity, Islam are all very patriarchal, and that's changing not quickly enough, but in very significant ways. So this question of gender is a constant thing we have to address and confront.
Right. The question about Michael and Gabriel, do they appear a lot in the Zohar, or is this a unique reference?
Not that often. The Zohar does have angels, but it doesn't specify Michael and Gabriel that often. Sometimes it prefers stranger names. There are many other angels. There are whole encyclopedias, dictionaries of angels. You can find more in Hebrew, but some in English too. Zohar doesn't refer to angels so often in its main text, but then there are parts of the Zohar that have more angelic material. The role Michael and Gabriel go back to earlier tradition, and Gabriel is mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Daniel. Michael, I believe, is also mentioned a couple times in the Bible. And then in rabbinic literature, you have 4 archangels: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. Michael and Gabriel are the 2 major archangels in rabbinic tradition.
So I think we talked about prophets and their ability to interpret dreams, right? So I wanted to tie that in. And but we also know that our tradition says that there's no more prophecy. So does that mean that people can't interpret dreams now anymore? How does the prophets and their interpretation of dreams fit into this whole?
It's not so much that prophets interpret dreams. I mean, that you do find it in the book of Daniel. There are dreams, and then Gabriel helps to interpret the dream. What the Zohar is saying. Well, let's start with that line, that amazing line in the Talmud. A dream is 1/60th of prophecy. So you might say, we don't have prophecy anymore. We have little hints of prophecy. One of the ways you get a hint of prophecy is in a dream. So a dream is a fraction of prophecy. But then the question of interpreting the dream, what's significant in the Zohar passage is that human interpretation has great power. You're not so much waiting for God to interpret the dream. You're trying to find out what the dream means. So you have to be careful who you tell your dream to. Okay, so people who use psychoanalysis, be careful who you pick to be your analyst. It has to be someone who's on your side. That could raise. Certainly, people could object to that and argue that out of the room very quickly. But the Zohar is comparing dream to prophecy, but not equating them. As your question of prophecy has ceased, that is a good rabbinic notion. That with the last of the biblical prophets, Malachi, prophecy ceased. Not everyone accepted that. In the Middle Ages, you have debates. Could what's called the Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh still manifests, maybe a slightly lower rung than prophecy, but still being inspiration. Sometimes this is called Bat Kol, right? An echo, literally the daughter of a voice. So you don't get God's voice, but you get the daughter of God's voice. You get an echo, a heavenly echo.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly read this over. Here we go. This is the notes section. Korban and Olah drawing near and ascending. Korban and offering a sacrifice. The root kurv means to draw near. Why Korban, the final Hebrew letter Nun, seems superfluous. Korban, the drawing near, Rabbi Shimon reads the word as Queruvan, the final Nun, is understood as a pronominal suffix meaning the. Thus the word means the drawing near of the holy crowns, the Sephirot. This interpretation originates in Bahir. Why is it called Korban? Because it draws near the holy forms, another reading the holy powers. The Kabbalists of the 13th century relied on the Bahir and elaborated this particular teaching as Rabbi Shimon indicates. This is well known to the comrades. The Korban is a sacrament, unifying all the aspects of divinity and symbolizing the ascent of the human soul on the ladder of the Sephirot.
Somehow that's seen as a kind of inspiration, a kind of the Holy Spirit that could make up for the lack of prophecy.
Alex has been waiting patiently, so I'm going to unmute him to ask his question.
Thank you. Hello, Daniel. So my question, if you could say a few words about Sephirot hierarchy, how one should understand it? Is it like the higher ranks or the higher Sephirot more kind of challenging to comprehend, goes from top to down, and specifically the Tiferet is below Gevorah and Hesed, and what does it mean?
I'm sorry, what was the last thing specifically? What about Gevorah?
Tiferet is below Gevorah and Hesed. How to understand such?
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look again at the diagram. So this diagram is very helpful, but it's also problematical because it knows Shekhinah is down here, and we go up level by level. The Zohar did use the word rungs. I mentioned Sulam HaAliyah, the ladder of ascension. It sounds totally hierarchical. At certain points, you have to get rid of this diagram and think of the Sefirot in other ways. Okay, and there are other depictions of the Sefirot. Maybe next week we'll look at a couple. Sometimes you have it as concentric circles, not as rungs of a ladder, but circles. Sometimes Malchut is in the middle. Sometimes Malchut is at the outside. So it's good to think of them in different possible configurations. And really, this is encouraging us to explore within, to go within, to go deep within, we should.
Good afternoon, Natasha. This is John. I met you last night. Hope you're having a great Sunday. I'm gonna head down to my boat at Montrose Harbor at 4. I know you said you live in Lincoln Park, so you're not too far away. If you want to come have a little sunset cocktail or walk the shoreline there, just text me back. Hope you're having a great day. Bye.
Shouldn't think only of going from where we are up to heaven. We should think of going deeper inside the mind, deeper inside the heart, deeper inside your kishkas, looking for what's troubling us, what's going on with our inner dynamics. The Zohar is aiming at that. It's not until we get to Hasidism, to Hasidic teaching, that really turns these sefirot into psychology. Think of these as human qualities. Okay? For the Zohar, they're divine qualities and human qualities. Hasidism comes and emphasizes what's going on inside of you. So I would say you can gain some insight into the sefirot by looking at this chart, but put it aside and think of other ways to imagine the sefirot. Specifically, Tiferet. Tiferet is harmonizing Chesed and Gvura. You can think of it as, in some sense higher, because it's neither right nor left. It's the balance of both of them. But here, the picture here is of a divine light. Okay, divine light is streaming through the sefirot, following this pattern and ending up with Shekhinah. Shekhinah includes all of the colors of the rainbow.
I had a question.
I want to respond to something that I see from my old high school companion, Neil Eisenberg, if I can get back to it here. Okay, you mentioned Freud. Interesting how that speaking something seems to make it so, right? Putting it into words is so powerful. Sounds a bit like cognitive therapeutic approach, where thoughts about are neutral, even colors who we see in the world, and changes our perspective. The power of formulating, the power of saying something. Here the Zohar is applying it specifically to dreams, but really it's something to contemplate. How it's so important what you say and how you say it and how you word it. The Zohar speaks of, machshava, dibur, maaseh, thought, speech, action, right? And that continuum is so important to be mindful, to be caring, to be loving with the words that you say, how harmful they can be, how destructive they can be, how negative they can be.
So just in our last few minutes, there was a question that came up last week. Someone had asked me and wanted me to bring it up, which is, given all your time you've spent studying the Zohar and Kabbalah, are there any other mystical traditions that you would compare Kabbalah to, that you found resonant? Is Kabbalah unique? Is it borrowing from other traditions? Is it talking to other traditions? Is it informing or being informed by other traditions?
Yeah, one of the fascinating thing about mysticism is how you find parallels with other teachings. Right? If you find the Zohar says something, and then some Buddhist teacher, also in the 13th century, Dogen, one of the great masters of Zen, is a contemporary with Moses de Leon, with composer of the Zohar, both in the 13th century. And it's very exciting. It's very uplifting to find a parallel in another text. You find it in Buddhist texts, and Sufi texts, and Christian texts, and Hindu texts, because mystics are, when you come down to it, finally discovering the same truth, which is that I am part of something greater, right? Going beyond the normal confines of ego consciousness. That's really what mysticism is about. Building a bridge or discovering the connection between your own limited ego and the unnameable, the infinite, God, divine, energy, whatever you're going to call it. Einstein says this, that the goal of religion is to realize that we're part of the cosmos. And that journey you see in so many traditions. So to me, wherever I find the parallel, I find it exciting. Sometimes I point out parallels in the notes in this edition to Rumi or to Buddhist teachers. Jesus is a very important source. It's very important for Jews to appreciate the wisdom of Jesus, not to worship Jesus, not to become a Jew for Jesus, but to realize that Jesus was a Jewish teacher, and he is a Jewish mystic. So that's a mysticism that's within Judaism, and yet developing into an independent tradition. Of course, the bloody history of Jewish-Christian relations makes it very difficult to appreciate Jesus, but that's important too. So I wouldn't say any one particular faith. There's certain very strong parallels between the Buddhist emphasis on the present, on what's right here, on this. You find a lot in Buddhism about thusness, suchness, and Kabbalah gives the word this.
That journey is seen in so many traditions.
This, Shekhinah's divine presence right here.
Are there any other places in the Zohar where dreams are discussed, or is this it? Did you just
This is the most extensive discussion in the Zohar on dreams. I'll recommend a book, Tishby, Tishby, Isaiah Tishby, has a book called Wisdom of the Zohar. It's 3 volumes, but it's in paperback. That's the best place to turn if you want to know what does the Zohar say about X, because he does it by subject, and he probably refers to some other passages, but from what I recall, this is the most complete, and it's not that complete, just some intriguing hints, but it's fascinating how the Zohar draws on the Midrash and then moves into Kabbalah and comes down to something very human at the end, that relationship between Joseph and his brothers, and how the brothers seal their fate by spitting out the negative meaning of that dream.
I don't know if there's any other thing. There's always lots of stuff we could cover in very limited time. So just from your perspective, do you believe that Cordovero wrote the whole Zohar? In other words, is it one author or is it multiple authors?
Yeah, I should say it's not Cordovero. Moses Cordovero was a great prolific Kabbalist, but the Moses we're talking about is Moses de Leon.
Sorry, I meant de Leon.
Yeah, in the 13th century, Moses de Leon. And Cordovero was a great colleague of Isaac Luria in the next creative period of Kabbalah, Sfat and Safed. I think Moses de Leon wrote the bulk of the Zohar's commentary on the Torah. I would guess, 70% of the Zohar's commentary on the Torah. But it's hard to know. I don't know if we'll ever know. The clearest proof that he is the author, the main author, is to compare his Hebrew writings with the Zohar. Moses de Leon never admitted that he wrote the Zohar, but he writes many books in Hebrew where he says, I, Moses de Leon, am writing this book in the city of Guadalajara, Spain, that is, not Mexico, in Guadalajara, in the year, he gives the place, he gives the title, and he writes books of Kabbalah. They're not as beautiful as the Zohar, they're not as poetic, but you can often tell that it's the same person. You can sometimes tell it's the same person because he'll refer to the Zohar in his Hebrew writings, and he'll refer to it in such a playful way. It seems that he's alluding to his own masterpiece that he never comes out and says he wrote.
Maybe last question. Brian asks, is it possible to study the Zohar on your own? So it's a question I ask because today studying with you is an example of why it's so hard to study the Zohar on your own, because you are actually taking us through your notes, but you're explaining the notes, and you are a master guide. So I assume someone could open up the Zohar, but on their own, I would find it to be very challenging without having someone to at least interact with to try to understand, if not a master teacher. But do you have any thoughts about? That's why you have a whole class on Zohar, is to help people. But
right.
Anyway,
what we do in the class is pretty much what we did today, and move a little more slowly, and we spend more time. We look at parallels and stuff. But I would say, I wrote the commentary this way. You see how dense and extensive the commentary is. I wrote the commentary this way so that people could approach it on their own. I think if you move very slowly and carefully, if you have a Bible next to you, if you've studied some Bible, you can't make sense of the Zohar without some knowledge of the Bible. Okay, now let me say this. It's often said in traditional circles, you shouldn't open the Zohar until you've mastered not only the Bible, but the Talmud. You should study the whole Talmud, and maybe Midrash, and maybe Halakha. You should study everything before you even venture into the Zohar. That's often been the traditional approach. My sense is that, if we wait for people to do that, a tiny fraction of the Jewish population or the world population will ever get to the Zohar. So I wrote the commentary so that people could approach it if you're very careful, if you're very patient, if you can work slowly with the Bible next to you, looking up occasionally things in the Talmud. But it certainly helps to study with someone, with a teacher, and I can recommend my class highly. But there are other ways to do it. You can do it on your own. You can do it with a friend. You can do it with another teacher. There's so much of the Zohar is through dialogue. It's rabbis wandering on the road and exchanging secrets of Torah. So it helps a lot to study with someone. And some of the people in our course do havruta, do companion study. To study with someone and in a class is tremendous.
Robin, I'm reading your comments. It's very funny because, really it's about relaxation, I think. And those rooms want to essentially, the whole thing is about capturing crash out. Like, that's the only value content, and like inducing crash out. It's basically the prank call show, but these people don't retransport that content to the other. Exactly. Like, they're actually the Walking Dead. That's why I say this is hell for zombies. So just have compassion on these people. They're trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out what I'm actually listening to, in my opinion. So I know it's so great to listen to how horrible they are, but the problem is, it's like, I feel like you have to do something different every single day. Good, record it. Because what you're really doing is like creating a South Park episode. But the point is, who watches South Park every single day? The people in these rooms, and maybe me and you. But like, basically, it's like, I had a lot to drink last night. So what I'm saying is, you value your health and your time more and more and more, because time is so limited. And to let those people echo inside of your brain is like deciding to drive a truck off of a cliff. I am complete.
But I know a good number of people who've joined the class said, I bought your book, I bought volume 1, I bought the first 5 volumes, I bought all 12 volumes, and I started reading it, and I didn't get it anywhere, so I want to do a class. So some people really need the class, and I think many people benefit from the class, but some people, I think, can begin on their own. If the class is too expensive for you, then email me, and we will work it out. The cost is not a barrier, and there are scholarship funds available.
Thank you. So I want to wish you all great dreams tonight, and a warning: don't tell your dreams to anybody you don't trust, I guess. Right. Thank you for taking us into this part of the Zohar today, and being a master guide for all of us. It's really a treat to have you as our teacher. Thank you all in the audience and participants as well for your great insights. And I will follow up this program with sending out the handouts again, as well as the information about joining Professor Matt's class and some other materials that may be of interest to all of you. Looking forward to having you back next week for the final in this 3-part series. And I guess the great thing is we could do 3-part series for many years with Professor Matt, and hopefully we can do that. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Take care. Shalom.
For over 17 years, I had an abusive relationship with the P word, and logically, I knew that it was detrimental to my.
Good to see everyone again. We're going to explore a passage today from the Zohar about meditation. The Zohar does not often describe meditation, and even in this passage, it doesn't give a detailed description of a meditative technique, but in a way it does, because it's talking about contemplating a candle, meditating on a candle. We really find out a lot about the Sfirot in this passage, and I want to share the screen now and show you a couple of diagrams. Show you one diagram of the Sfirot, and then we'll turn to our text. This we began exploring previously. We looked at some of the highlights last week. This is the main symbol system of the Kabbalah, what's known as the 10 Sefirot, the 10 aspects of God's personality, you might say. As I mentioned before, beyond all of these specific qualities of God, is the ultimate reality of God, and the Kabbalah calls that Ein Sof. Literally, there is no end, or the infinity. So God is infinite. We shouldn't think that these sefirot really capture the totality of God. These offer us glimpses of God's qualities, of God's attributes. Last week, we were talking about dreams. We talked a little bit about Netzach and Hod, the source of prophecy, and Malchut, Shekhinah, the last of the 10 Sefirot. Today, the focus is really on the divine couple, the male and female aspects of the Sefirot. Tiferet, which is the central Sefirah, this middle Sefirah here. Tiferet, literally beauty, but I think better understood as harmony, harmonizing the right and left, harmonizing chesed, divine love, on the right, and gevurah, divine power, on the left. So Tiferet is the middle of those two polar opposites. Another of its names is Rachamim, compassion. It's also known as the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. So this Sefirah represents the masculine side of God. The goal of Kabbalah is to unite the male and the female, to bring these two halves of God together, Tiferet, the male, and Malchut, or Shekhinah, the female. Their union is seen as the goal of Torah, the goal of mitzvot. This sounds very strange in a Jewish context to speak about a male and female half of God, and the union of God, the romance of God. This is a mythical depiction, and I think it's meant to tell us something about our role in religion, because according to Kabbalah, the divine couple cannot unite, Tiferet cannot unite with Shekhinah unless we act in the world. If we act virtuously, if we act righteously, if we perform the mitzvot, if we bring about tikkun olam, if we repair the world, if we mend the world, then we stimulate the love between Tiferet and Malchut. Then we unify the divine couple. We unite God. We make God one. God is one, but God yearns for us to be involved in the divine process, in the divine manifestation. So the passage we're going to look at today speaks about Shekhinah, right? Her technical Kabbalistic name is Malchut, but I'm going to refer to her more as Shekhinah. So Shekhinah and Tiferet will be mentioned today. And at the end, there'll be a very brief allusion to Bina. Bina meaning understanding. Bina is pictured as the divine mother. Bina gives birth to the lower 7 Sefirot. The divine father near the top is Chokhmah. Even though the word Chokhmah is feminine, in Kabbalah, Chokhmah is the father. Bina is the mother. And they generate the 7 lower Sefirot. But as I say, the focus today is going to be on Shekhinah, or Malchut, Tiferet, and Bina at the end, very briefly, their mother, the divine mother. One other thing about Shekhinah, the tree of life. We've come across that image. Some of you have seen other pictures of Kabbalistic trees. The Sefirot are often pictured as a tree. But Kabbalah actually speaks of 2 different trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. The tree of life is identified with Tiferet, sometimes with all of the Sefirot, but sometimes specifically with Tiferet. So this middle Sefirah can be called Eitz HaChayim, the tree of life. Shekhinah is known as Eitz HaDa'at, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. According to Genesis, Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which can imply many things. Because of the fact that they eat of that tree, they become mortal. So death comes into the world as a result of eating from the tree of knowledge. And because of that, partly because of that, Shekhinah is associated both with life and with death. We'll see a passage today connecting Shekhinah with death. But she is the source of life and also has a connection to the end of life and to death itself. Okay, let's begin our passage. This is from the Zohar Pritzker edition. This is the Zohar on the Torah portion of Bereshit, the first Torah portion of the Torah. And actually, there is the quote here from the first portion in the passage we're looking at. Near the top of the page, you do have Genesis 1:1 here at Hashamayim. But we're going to begin over here with Rabbi Shimon teaching us something about fire and light and meditating on a candle. You have the Zohar Pritzker edition, volume 1. It's on page 282. But we'll send out this PDF. Ari has already made it available, and anyone who wants it can get it easily from Ari. So let's begin. They rose and were about to leave. In other words, a few of the rabbis are discussing Torah, discussing the secrets, when Rabbi Shimon said, "A word lingers here with us." It's a beautiful way to say, I have something more to say. There's one more thing I'd like to teach. Rabbi Shimon says, "A word lingers here with us." He opened saying, 2 verses are written. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire, and you cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. Okay, 2 verses from the book of Deuteronomy. Even though this is the Zohar on Genesis, the Zohar loves to jump around and quote verses from other books. So he's quoting here 2 verses from the last book of the Torah, Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And what's the problem with these 2 verses? There seems to be a problem, which is the first verse says, God is a devouring fire. Ki Adonai Elohecha esh ochlahu. And then in the same chapter of Deuteronomy, you cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. The Hebrew is Ve'atem hadvekim b'Adonai Elohechem chayim kulchem hayom. I'm sure many of you recognize that because it's part of the service. It's part of the Shabbat morning service when the Torah is about to be read, when the Torah is taken out from the ark. This verse is recited. This verse is chanted by the cantor or the rabbi. You cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. So what's the problem? The problem is God is a fire. How can you possibly cleave to God? So the verses seem to present that problem, and that problem is discussed in rabbinic literature. The Zohar has its own approach. So continue here. We have established these verses in various places, and the companions have been aroused by them, which means the companions are the companions of Rabbi Shimon, other rabbis. But what he means here is that these verses have already been discussed in the Talmud, in the Midrash, not just in the Zohar, but in earlier texts of Jewish tradition. The question is, how can these 2 verses make sense together? How can God be a fire, and yet how can we be commanded to cling to that fire, to join that fire? Let's look down at a note to see how these verses are discussed in earlier texts. This is page 282, note 1341. Quite a lot of footnotes pile up here in this volume. We have established these verses. The apparent contradiction between the 2 verses is discussed in the Talmud. BT is Babylonian Talmud, the tractate Ketubot about marriage documents. Rabbi Elazar said, you cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. Now, is it possible to cleave to Shekhinah? How can you cleave to God? Notice he says Shekhinah. Shekhinah in the Talmud doesn't mean the feminine half of God. In the Talmud, Shekhinah means God, or the divine presence. How can you cleave to God when it is written, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire? Okay, that's the question the Talmud poses. How can you cleave to God if God is Esh Ochla, a devouring fire? Rather, the meaning is, whoever marries his daughter to a disciple of the wise, meaning to a scholar, if you marry your daughter to a Torah scholar, or if you conduct business on the behalf of scholars, if you benefit scholars from your assets, then you are regarded by Scripture as if you cleave to Shekhinah. Very interesting. So he's really saying it's impossible to cleave to fire. You can't cleave to God. You would be burned up instantly. But if you support scholars, then it's as if you joined Shekhinah. Okay, notice a parallel in Babylonian Talmud Sotah, another part of the Talmud. Here I'm paraphrasing. Rabbi Chama, son of Hanina, explains that one can approach and withstand the consuming fire of Shekhinah by imitating the divine. If you imitate God, then it's as if you cling to Shekhinah. How do you imitate God? By clothing the naked, visiting the sick, comforting mourners, burying the dead. In other words, if you act ethically, if you act with some care and compassion and love for other people, then it's as if you are clinging to Shekhinah. There's one beautiful mystical response to this, the end of this note. A mystical response to this dilemma is offered by Jikatila, he's a Kabbalist who lived in Spain around the time of the Zohar. He says, as for what the rabbis have said, now is it possible for one to cleave to Shekhinah? It certainly is. He takes that question, which is a rhetorical question, right? In the Talmud, it's, can you really cleave to Shekhinah? Obviously you can't. But Jikatila says, no, you can. Being a mystic, being a Kabbalist, he thinks it is possible to cleave, to join the divine. So all of that is in the Talmud, and that's what Rabbi Shimon says. We have established these verses. Okay, we've already talked about it, but he says, come and see. He's now going to offer a new approach to this image of God being a fire. Come and see. For Yud-Heh-Vav, your God is a devouring fire. The word has been discussed among the companions. There is a fire, devouring, devouring and consuming it. For there is fire fiercer than fire, as they have established. Okay, there are different types of fire. Don't think that there's just one fire. Look down at the note and you'll see what he's referring to here in the Talmud, note 1342. This is page 282, the right-hand column. See, again, BT, Babylonian Talmud. Here it's the tractate Yoma, the tractate devoted to Yom Kippur. And in that Talmudic passage, we read that the fire of Shekhinah is called a fire-devouring fire. The angels are fiery, and Shekhinah is so strong it can devour the fire of the angels. So that's what Rabbi Shimon says, there is a fire-devouring fire. So he's alluding here to Shekhinah. Okay, in the Talmud, Shekhinah is called a fire-devouring fire. And you remember I said previously the Zohar avoids giving the names of the Sirot, just to make it a little more interesting, a little more difficult, more challenging for the reader. So Rabbi Shimon could just say, we're talking about Shekhinah, but he doesn't name Shekhinah, he just says a fire-devouring fire. And that's supposed to remind us that in the Talmud, Shekhinah is called exactly that. But come and see. Notice he starts the paragraph, come and see, and now just a few lines later, but come and see. Let's look more deeply into this. Whoever desires to penetrate the wisdom of holy unification. What does that mean? Whoever wants to penetrate the wisdom of holy unification. If you want to understand how the Sefirot unite, okay, what he really means here is if you want to understand how Tiferet, the male, unites with Shekhinah, the female, or maybe he means how all of the Sefirot unite together. If you want to understand the union of the Sefirot, you should contemplate the flame ascending from a glowing ember or a burning candle. For flame ascends only when grasped by coarse substance. Okay, that last line means simply a flame can't burn unless it has fuel. The candle can't burn unless without the wax. A lamp can't burn without oil, with some fuel. So watching the flame from a candle, from an ember, will help you understand how the Sefirot unite. And now he's going to explain. Come and see. Okay, a third, come and see. The Aramaic ta-chaze, come and see. In a flame ascending are two lights, a white light radiant, the other a light tinged with black or blue. Okay, you can picture in your mind a candle. Some of you may have a candle burning. And I encourage you to try a candle meditation after we complete this at some point. When you have time, take out this passage again and do it actually looking at the candle. But you can see that. We all have that picture of the flame, and then at the bottom of the flame, it's darker. The middle of the flame is blue, and toward the bottom it can turn darker. So Rabbi Shimon wants us to think about two lights, the white light and let's say for the moment the blue light. The white light is above, ascending unswervingly, while beneath it is the blue or black light, a throne for the white, which rests upon it, each embracing the other, becoming one. Okay, now, he's going to say this in a moment, but I'll just say it right now. The white light here symbolizes Tiferet. The blue light symbolizes Shekhinah. So let's look again here. He's calling Tiferet the white light. Okay, Tiferet here is the white light, and Malchut, Shekhinah, is the blue or black light. And their union is what he's talking about. Okay, each embracing the other. Okay, the union of those two sefirot happens as we see in the candle. Those two colors are united or are joined. This black light colored blue below is a throne of glory for the white. Here lies the mystery of the thread of blue. What is he mean, the thread of blue? He's talking about the tzitzit, the fringe on the prayer shawl. We don't usually see them as blue, but originally the original command in the Bible is that thread should be dyed blue. And that dye actually came from a snail that inhabits the Mediterranean coast. And in recent times, beginning in the 19th century, I believe the 19th or the early 20th century, that custom spread in Hasidic circles to really make the tzitzit blue, to use that blue dye. And many people today tried to have their tzitzit include that blue dye. But here he's saying that the Shekhinah, which is blue or black light, also symbolized by the blue tzitzit, the blue fringe. Let's take a look at this note. Verse 1344, a white light symbolizing respectively Tiferet and Shekhinah. The last Sefirah, Shekhinah, has no light of her own, but reflects the light of the other Sefirot. Here we have the light. Here we have the color black or blue associated with Shekhinah, but at other times the Zohar will say that the Shekhinah reflects the Sefirot and has no independent light of her own. But specifically on blue, let's look at the next note, 1345. The mystery of the thread of blue. The blue thread woven into the tassels of one's garment, according to the Torah, the book of Numbers, right, which is part of the Shema. Full recitation of the Shema in the prayer book includes, as its last paragraph, these verses, this verse from the book of Numbers, that you should have on the corner of your garment a thread of blue. Katil techelet. The Hebrew word techelet means blue or purplish blue. Now look at this book, Sifrei. This is a midrash on the book of Numbers. Rabbi Meir says, whoever fulfills the mitzvah of tzitzit, okay, the tassel or the fringe, is considered to have greeted the face of Shekhinah. So already the midrash connects tzitzit with Shekhinah. If you wear tzitzit, if you're careful to fulfill that commandment, it's as if you've greeted Shekhinah, as it were. For blue resembles the sea, and the sea resembles the sky, and the sky resembles the throne of glory. The throne of glory meaning the divine throne. So if you wear tzitzit, which are blue, that reminds you of the sea, that reminds you of the sky. The sky reminds you of the throne of glory, where Shekhinah, the divine presence, is enthroned. So that's why he says here, the mystery of the thread of blue. Okay, back to the Zohar. This blue-black throne, that we could say Shekhinah, is grasped by another substance below, so it can flame, arousing it to embrace the white light. Okay, again, we have that the substance below, so that the fire can't burn unless it's fueled by something beneath it. Look at note 1346 here. Another substance below, the flame of the candle feeds on the wick and wax. Similarly, Shekhinah feeds on the realms beneath her and is thereby enabled to flame and unite with Tiferet. Okay, Shekhinah, the feminine, cannot unite with her partner Tiferet unless she's stimulated, unless she's fueled, unless she's inflamed by something beneath. Right now, he's not saying what that is, but some substance beneath the last of the 10 sefirot. Back to the text. Sometimes this blue-black turns red, while the white light above never wavers, constantly white. So Tiferet is constantly one color. Shekhinah could be blue or black, sometimes also red. Why red? Look at note 1347. Because sometimes this blue-black turns red when Shekhinah is influenced by Gevurah, the attribute of strict judgment. She's tinged with the color red. Okay, looking at our diagram here, Malchut or Shekhinah is influenced by this sefirah, by the sefirah on the left, Gevurah, power, or Din, judgment. Its color is red. Chesed is white, and here we've seen that white imbues Tiferet. Tiferet becomes white. But Shekhinah can sometimes be affected by harsh powers of judgment, and that would bring out a red tone. She could be tinged with red. Back to the Zohar. This is grasped in two directions, above by that white light, below by what lies beneath, by which it is fueled, primed to glow. Okay, so Shekhinah is grasped above by Tiferet, the white light, and Shekhinah is grasped below. Again, the Zohar is being very elusive, very enigmatic. The Zohar doesn't say what Shekhinah is being grasped by below. Zohar just says below by what lies beneath, by which Shekhinah is fueled, primed to glow. This constantly consumes and devours what is placed beneath it. For the blue light consumes anything cleaving below, anything it rests upon, since by nature it consumes and devours. On it depends destruction and death of all. So Shekhinah is a consuming fire. It will burn whatever is beneath it, and because of that, it's connected here to destruction and death. So it consumes anything cleaving below, while that white light hovering over it never devours or consumes, nor does its light waver. Therefore, Moses said, for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, is a devouring fire. Okay, he's going back to one of those verses in Deuteronomy, where Deuteronomy is attributed to Moses. So if it's in Deuteronomy, Moses said it. Moses says God is a devouring fire. And remember, the Talmud describes that as Shekhinah, the fire devouring other fire, really devouring and consuming anything found below. That is why Moses said, you're God, not our God. For Moses inhabited that white light above, which does not consume or devour. Okay, he's wondering, why does the Torah say that Moses said, you're God? Why does it Moses say, why doesn't Moses say, for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, our God is a devouring fire? Why does Moses say, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire? Moses is speaking to Israel, and he somehow doesn't include himself. He says, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God. But the Zohar says that Moses said, your God, and not our God, because Moses inhabits a higher realm. Moses inhabits the realm of Tiferet. Okay, Moses attained that rung. Okay, most people, or could say the Jewish people, is identified with Shekhinah. They can reach that level of Malchut through great devotion. But Moses attained a higher level. He reached the level of Tiferet, the white light. So he doesn't say, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, our God is a consuming fire, a devouring fire. He says, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire, because he abides in the realm of Tiferet, and that white light, Tiferet, Moses' rung, Moses' sirah, does not consume or devour. Let's pause here. There's a little bit more I want to explore in the Zohar passage, but let's pause here and see if any questions have come up. And Ari, please, you could, because something in the chat, or if someone has a hand raised, we could pause for a minute and explore this.
You'll be very quiet today in the chat. I guess I'll give people a moment by asking two quick questions. One is, you talk about this underlying concept or important concept in the Zohar and in the Kabbalah about being the unification of male and female. Is that explicitly stated that way, or is it just all implicit and therefore it becomes explicit once you have read the whole Zohar?
Yeah, the passage we have here, there's hardly anything there that would suggest there's actual union, actual romance. You do that phrase, embracing one another. But other places in the Zohar, it's much more overt, really full, even graphic descriptions of the union of the male and female. The Zohar is sometimes subtle and very often enigmatic and cryptic, but it's clear that there's a divine romance. Now remember, this is all really just glimpses of the divine. Ultimately, the Zohar would insist that God is beyond description, right? God cannot be captured in our words or images. So Ein Sof, the infinite, there it's just a realm of pure oneness. There you don't have different qualities, different aspects. But once you reach this realm of the 10 Sefirot, there you really do have God described in very personal, very anthropomorphic ways, right? Maimonides, who tried to eliminate anthropomorphism, right? This human descriptions of God, Maimonides tried to eliminate those as much as he could. But the Zohar reacts against Maimonides and says, ultimately God cannot be described. Ultimately God is Ein Sof. But most of the Zohar is about the Sefirot and not about Ein Sof. And so you do have really full descriptions of anti-divine romance.
In your notes, where you quote from the beginning of the section, we quote from the Talmud, where they're explaining these verses, the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. In the notes, they just jump to Shekhinah already. In the Talmud, do they just automatically say that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh from those two verses is the Shekhinah, or is that you using Shekhinah in that context in your notes so we can put two and two together?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. For the Zohar, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh would rarely signify Shekhinah. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh could signify Tiferet or all of the 10 Sefirot. It would be unusual for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh specifically to denote Shekhinah. So what we're seeing there in the Talmud is really, it really shows us the development of Shekhinah. Okay, in Rabbinic Judaism, you never have a description. You're going back to your first question. The union of the male and female within God, in the Talmud, you would never find that. You never find in the Talmud a description of the male and female parts of God uniting. There are one or two hints to a female divine quality. What I mean is Shekhinah, okay, which we see now as feminine because of the Kabbalah. Shekhinah in the Talmud and Midrash does not mean the feminine half of God. Shekhinah simply means God. Shekhinah means specifically how God manifests in the world. So God's presence in the world is what is meant by Shekhinah. In the Zohar, Shekhinah comes to mean the feminine half of God. But going back to your question, the Talmud does identify Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh as Shekhinah, because for the Talmud, Shekhinah simply means God. So any divine name could refer to Shekhinah. Whereas in the Zohar, because Shekhinah is specifically feminine, it would not usually be identified with Shekhinah. I hope that's more of an explanation than more confusion. But that's would say.
I think there are some comments that I think what people are referring to in their comments is Shabbat as this ultimate mystical union. Kabbalat Shabbat, lighting the candles, welcoming the bride, and all the mystical stuff that people explain about union and what's going on there, and how this ties into some of what you've been teaching us.
Very much so. That's very relevant. Kabbalat Shabbat. It's interesting. It's called Kabbalat Shabbat, which means what? The Kabbalah of Shabbat. But it doesn't mean the Jewish mysticism of Shabbat. Kabbalah means welcoming. Lekabel is to receive or to welcome. So Kabbalat Shabbat means welcoming the Shabbat. Now it's interesting. Kabbalat Shabbat does have something to do with Kabbalah, because Kabbalat Shabbat was invented by the Kabbalah. You do not have the full liturgy, the full prayers of Kabbalat Shabbat until we come to the Kabbalah. The Talmud does not say to begin the Shabbat with Lecha Dodi, but welcoming the bride. The Talmud does refer to Shabbat as a queen, as a bride, but you don't have the full ritual of Kabbalat Shabbat until we come to the Kabbalah. So what is Shabbat for the Kabbalah? Shabbat is the wedding day of God. Friday evening, we're celebrating Shekhinah, and as you say, Shekhinah is identified as the Shabbat queen, the Shabbat bride, and the union of Shekhinah with the Holy One, blessed be He, is actually hinted at. It's actually referred to in Lecha Dodi. Now, what is Lecha Dodi? I'm sure most of you know Lecha Dodi, one of the most beautiful prayers in the book. That was written by a Kabbalist in Tzfat, in the city of Tzfat in the 16th century. And that is a celebration of Shekhinah, and it refers to Shekhinah and her husband. Now, who is the husband of Shekhinah? The husband of Shekhinah is Tiferet, her masculine partner, her spouse. So Kabbalat Shabbat is a wonderful example of how Kabbalah affected Judaism. You know, many people say, well, Kabbalah is interesting, but is it really mainstream Judaism? Okay, what could be more mainstream than Lecha Dodi? What could be more mainstream than the image of the Sabbath bride, the Sabbath queen? And that really is to a great extent the contribution, the gift of the Zohar and the Kabbalah.
One last comment. One of our regulars and donors noted how Shekhinah and the description of Shekhinah in the flame really puts the female once again in a place of deprivation of agency. That Shekhinah is dependent on two different elements, as opposed to Tiferet, which is above it all, more powerful, I would say. And anyway, it was just an interesting note of what you taught us.
No, that's very important. It's very important to honestly say that the Zohar, the Kabbalah, is a product of the medieval mind. In some ways, it's very much, of the past. With all of the advance that is made, okay, it is a great step forward to introduce, to recover the feminine within God, right? God is so overwhelmingly masculine, as we've said before, right? In all of Western religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, God is overwhelmingly masculine. It's hard to find descriptions of God as feminine. So it's a great breakthrough. It's a great step forward that the Zohar and the Kabbalah celebrate the feminine nature of the divine. But it is true that this is a hierarchical system very often in many ways. And Shekhinah is beneath Tiferet. Shekhinah is seen as the throne of Tiferet. And here the white light is constant, Tiferet, where Shekhinah could be blue or black or red. The thing of her being dependent on what's beneath, though, is very interesting, because for the Zohar, God is dependent on the human being. I would say the masculine and the feminine of God are in some ways incomplete without human participation, without human action. If we don't act in the world, then God is left not unified. God is separate. The male without the female without the male. So both aspects of Shekhinah, the male and the female, are dependent on human action. The Kabbalistic phrase for this is Sorech Gavoa, literally the need on high. God needs us. God needs the human being. Many of you are familiar with the thought of Abraham Joshua Heschel, great teacher of the 20th century. And his most famous book is called God in Search of Man. Okay, it should be God in search of the human, we might say. But God is searching for us. It's not just we're searching for God. God needs us. So that radical idea you have hinted at in the Talmud and the Midrash, but the Zohar really develops it further. So I would just say, in summary, the female is still subservient to the male, according to many descriptions. But on the other hand, both male and female are in need of the human being. I would say, too, sometimes Shekhinah is called king, not just queen. Sometimes Shekhinah can be king because she rules over the world. Even though Tiferet is higher than Shekhinah in some sense, Shekhinah is in charge of the world. Shekhinah is ruling over the world. Okay, let's return to the text, and then by the time we're done, we'll have some more questions. So, Moses says, you're God, not our God, because Moses is connected with Tiferet. Come and see. Okay, we're on page 284 of volume 1, the Zohar Brisker edition. Come and see. The only arousal kindling this blue light to be grasped by the white light is Israel cleaving below. Okay, finally, there's a reference to the Jewish people, to Israel. So the blue light we're saying is Tiferet. The blue light we're saying is Shekhinah. The only way to kindle Shekhinah, for her to be grasped by Tiferet, okay, to stimulate the divine union, how does that arousal happen? The only way is by Israel cleaving below. Israel has to yearn for God. Israel has to strive to connect with God in order for Shekhinah to unite with Tiferet. See what the note has here very simply, 1350. Their devotion, Israel's devotion, fuels the passion of the divine couple. Okay, without holiness on the part of human beings, on the part of Israel, God remains incomplete. God remains ununified. Grasped by the white light, comes Israel. Although by nature this blue-black light consumes anything cleaving below, right? Shekhinah is a fire. Anything placed beneath that fire will be consumed. Even though that's so, Israel cleaves below and abides enduringly. Even though Israel cleaves to Shekhinah, they're not consumed. As is written, you cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav, your God, are alive. Even though you're cleaving to God, okay, Yud-Heh-Vav here means Shekhinah, even though you're cleaving to Shekhinah, you're alive. To Yud-Heh-Vav, your God, not our God, right? Moses is on a different level, but we are connected. We are close to Shekhinah. Shekhinah is accessible to us. To Yud-Heh-Vav, your God, to that blue-black light devouring, consuming whatever cleaves below. Yet you cleave and endure. As is written, alive, every one of you today. Even though the fire consumes, somehow Israel is able to experience devekut, right? The Hebrew word here is devekut, cleaving. That's the word in the verse from Deuteronomy, va'atem hadevekim, you who cleave to God. So Israel can cleave to God and yet remain alive. That's the wonder. That's how we can reconcile these two verses. We should cleave to God. Even though Shekhinah is a fire, we're able to withstand that. Above the white light hovers a concealed light encompassing it. This is the allusion to Bina. Okay, so Malchut, Shekhinah is the blue light. Tiferet is the white light. Higher than Tiferet is Bina. Doesn't even name a color here, but Bina is a more concealed, hidden realm. Okay, the divine mother. Above the white light hovers a concealed light encompassing it. Here abides supernal mystery. You will discover all in the ascending flame, wisdoms of the highest. If you meditate on a candle, if you penetrate the outer surface meaning of those colors, you can imagine divine qualities. You can discover everything by gazing at a candle. Down at the note 1352, I bring something here from a famous scientist, 1352, you will discover all in the ascending flame. See the remark of the 19th century physicist Michael Faraday at the beginning of his Chemical History of a Candle. Okay, this is a little booklet that Michael Faraday wrote, Chemical History of a Candle. Look what he says. There is not a law under which any part of this universe is governed, which does not come into play and is touched upon in these phenomena. Okay, that may sound hard to understand, but now it becomes clear. There is no more open door by which you can enter into the study of natural philosophy than by considering the physical phenomena of a candle. Okay, what Faraday does in these talks, Chemical History of a Candle, is really talks he gave for children or for adolescents in the 19th century. He said you can find out everything you need to know about natural philosophy, really means science. You can find out everything you need to know about chemistry by looking at a candle, seeing how it consumes and how it feeds on physical substance. Faraday goes through that in a very different way than we've seen the Zohar do. But look what they share. Both of them say you can understand everything by looking at a candle. All of science or all of mysticism. You can understand the deepest secrets of nature, of being, of reality, if you meditate on a candle. It's beautiful there to see science and religion harmonizing in a certain way. So Rabbi Shimon has taught all of this. We're just going to read the next two lines in conclusion. Rabbi Pinchas approached and kissed him. Rabbi Pinchas kissed Rabbi Shimon, saying, "Blessed be the compassionate one that we happened to meet here. I'm so glad I ran into you, because look at the Torah that I have learned." Okay, let's stop the share and let's discuss this a little more. And I'd encourage people to ask questions either about this specifically, let's give that a few minutes, but then just more generally, Kabbalah, mysticism, Torah, anything that comes to mind, either in the chat or if you're adventurous, you could raise your hand and we may be able to call on you.
All of mysticism. So Howard has something to say. Howard says, in talking about Israel and cleaving to the light that consumes everything. So that's a very dangerous place to be, isn't it? I'm kind of paraphrasing. And the way we can protect ourselves, according to Howard, would be, well, we do the mitzvot and we adhere to the principles of faith, and that protects us and allows us to come close to this flame. But doesn't that imply great risk? In other words, can't this lead to self-destruction because we're so close